Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome to yet another brand new movie review. Now, if you're new here, my name is Sean. I do daily movie reviews here on YouTube, and they are also streaming for the audio over on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify for streaming. Now, in today's movie review, we're going to be doing one of the recently released from the earlier this year of 2025 of the movie called Sinners. Now, this is being pretty much marketed, or it was marketed as a horror movie, which we'll go through in a little bit here as well, and I'll kind of discuss kind of my feelings on that. But the film itself, again, was released on April 18th, 2025 in the U.S. It was directed by Ryan Coogler, who, if you are not familiar with his previous work before this film, it was Black Panther amongst many other things as well. It was rated R and has a runtime of 2 hours and 17 minutes. The main cast in it, which is pretty stacked for what it is of course Michael B. Jordan as Smoke and Stack for the two characters he double acted on. It's got Haley Steinfeld, Wunmi Musaku, pronunciation my bad, Miles Catton, Omar Benson Miller, and of course one of my favorites from back in the day of Delroy Lindo. Now, this movie, again, like I said before, it was marketed as a horror movie. My introduction to it, or how I heard of it, really overall was, besides just movie trailers, of just seeing it in trailers pretty, consistently from back in the springtime before it came out. And the trailers for this one kind of really, again, like a lot of other movies this year, didn't really give too much away from the actual movie itself, which is a good thing in most cases. And then I knew once because it came out in theaters, I personally didn't really have much interest in seeing it for what I can't remember why. I just didn't think it looked that good for my own personal preference. As for what it was, it just looked like a movie that was, it looked like it was done authentically and pretty good. But I feel like for me, like I really didn't understand the horror aspect of it all. I mean, I saw like I saw a few of the scenes of like the one of like Haley Steinfeld being all bloody and that kind of thing, and just and all their eyes and that kind of thing, and I knew to a certain extent how in a way of how the story would go in a sense. And then it was kind of weird because I remember it came out in theaters and it's rated R, and so I knew it was kind of heavy for horror from that aspect. Because these days most movies that are horror, if they are rated R, then you can tell they're usually going to be pretty bloody and gory for the most part overall. So this movie came out in theaters, and then I did not see it opening weekend for me for whatever reason lately with having a family and kids and being in school and working full time and all that. Like for me, if I don't see a movie either on like a Thursday or like screening on it or on an opening weekend, I tend to just kind of like lose track of the time of the day of the week, whatever it might be. And these days, a lot of movies I feel like a lot of movies are kind of coming out more and more and more in theaters, which is a great thing. I love that. But on the downside of it, I feel like a lot of movies are kind of filtering through theaters a lot quicker than they used to. And due to that reason, I just didn't get a chance, honestly, to get to see this in theaters. And then it kind of came out really, really kind of weirdly quickly for how good the reviews were of it for like Rotten Tomatoes and audience score. It kind of came out pretty quickly over to HBO Max. So I kind of counted down the days till the release on HBO Max with my wife, and was like, hey, once this movie, Sinners comes out on HBO Max, let's just watch it and go from there and see how good it is. And again, and one thing that kind of surprised me, just from like an overview of an outside perspective of someone who didn't see it in theaters, is that once it had its opening weekend, and I've said this for other movies as well that are a more not a bigger budget but a more bigger audience, like as far as like you can kind of tell on social media these days when a movie has a bigger audience or a bigger splash in the ocean of movies of like an audience perspective of who's seen it and who kind of cares about it. And when this movie kind of came out in theaters over the first opening weekend, so to speak, it was an interesting thing because a lot of people like really gave really heavily great reviews for it, and I do remember debating going to see it in the theater that weekend, like opening weekend, because of how good all the reviews were for it. Now the weird thing about the reviews for it was that there was not really any kind of typical description or typical feeling of why it was so good. Like, and that was what was weird to me about this movie when it came out in theaters. About the initial reviews and reactions to it is that a lot of people that loved it didn't give a reason why. They just said it was a good movie and it looked cool and it had some great acting in it and great, like a decent story, and it was a pretty kind of like a C minus almost version of how I view it for like what you would typically see of having such high ratings and such a high audience score to what an actual like to like it just the people that I saw review it, whether it was a critic or an audience member on online for the most part, and even on like on all the social media ads where people comment what they liked or didn't like it, with all that stuff can like as a general consensus, like a lot of them were just generally like, oh, it was good. That's all it was, and I thought it was kind of weird because again, most of the time when a movie is really that good, people will give a much more detailed description of or reasoning on why they liked it so much, whether it was the acting or the directing or whatever it might be, special effects, if it's a Marvel or DC movie, all that that usual stuff. And so the fact that this movie, to my knowledge, didn't really have that much of that at all, or at least I didn't see much about that or any real like deeper, like higher rating score or any kind of meaning behind it, kind of threw me off a little bit too. But the weird thing about it too is that after the movie came out, like the weeks that followed the opening weekend release, was that I kept on seeing more and more and more good audience scores and good Rotten Tomato scores. And I think it was at like upper 90s on Rotten Tomatoes for the first like 2 weeks it was actually in theaters. So I knew it had something going for it overall from an the release as far as like in the theater, and I kind of got the vibe from it that people just generally enjoyed it overall. But again, I just didn't ever really see anyone give really any deep reasons as to why. And that, I think, kind of pulled me away from wanting to spend the actual money on a ticket to go see it in the theater, which is not normally my thing. Normally, I'm fully, if you've watched my other reviews, I'm fully like go to the theater, go see the movie in the theater because to me, there's nothing like a movie theater experience for any movie compared to watching it at home. I don't care if you spend, $10,000-$20,000 on your home theater equipment and the experience you have at home. It still is not like going to see a movie in a theater, just because of the community that you're in and just the sound and just the vibe of everything. And you can't really be on your phone really at all. Whereas at home, it doesn't really matter. You can pause stuff and all that. So when you're in a theater, you have to be for the most part in the experience, in the moment. And I love the movie theater experience for that reason above watching movies for the first time at home unless you don't have a choice like Netflix. So anyways, with all that out of the way, so again, I saw all these reviews that were really positive for it, really up on top of the charts, all this good stuff. And then again, it was a weird thing where I saw that, but nobody really ever gave again like a really descriptive like why it was so good. So I kind of left it alone. And then again, really soon after that, there was news that HBO Max was going to pick it up onto HBO as a streaming movie. So I kind of was like, okay, well, I'll wait, a few weeks for it and see what happens. So I did, and then the time came, and the movie came out onto HBO Max, and then the weirdest thing happened was when cause I went into it with really, I don't want to say high expectations, but I went into the movie initially was just thinking like, okay, well this better be freaking good. Again, I knew nothing about the actual storyline overall besides the trailer, and again the trailers did not really give much of any information out really besides the fact that it had Haley Steinfeld and Michael B. Jordan, and he was double acting. And I also saw before I saw the movie, I saw a lot of behind the scenes stuff on YouTube for it and how it was made and how it was produced and how they did all the action scenes and so I knew that, so I didn't watch too much of it just because I didn't want to ruin the experience of watching the movie for the first time and with seeing all that stuff, and that's kind of the tricky part about YouTube, that it is that YouTube tends to release things. I mean, it was after the movie was out, so I guess that makes sense. But like, I just wanted to avoid all that until I saw the movie. So anyways, so movie came out, I didn't see it in theaters, and then it came on HBO Max, and then I was like, okay, let's check this out. And what was weird to me about it is that I've also said this in other movie reviews too, is that with an hour or with a runtime for this movie of again 2 hours and 17 minutes, to me that sets a lot of expectations, or it sets kind of like some expectations basically, where I feel like that if you're gonna have that long of a runtime for a movie, for a horror movie especially, then the storyline needs to be freaking on point. It needs to be solid. It needs to have a great build up, and the acting usually is pretty good for horror movies overall. Unless it's a really bad one, then it's pretty obvious from the beginning that's bad. But again, usually for that long of a runtime, you've got to have good direction and a good storyline that's got to be up on point, because I feel like these days with horror movies when they come out and they get such high reviews like this one did in theaters, then there had to be a reason that the story had to be really good overall for it to match that runtime, if that makes sense. So I kind of had that mentality without, like, before I went into it, just to stream it and that kind of thing. And again, I didn't have any knowledge of what the movie was really about besides previews, so I just kind of was like, okay, well, or the trailers, I mean. So I knew a little bit, but not much, just the actors and a little bit of story maybe. But movie came on, and then I watch it, get halfway through it, and kind of had a weird thing. So because so basically for me, long story short, from the actual watching experience of it all, is that the movie itself, I think it was, how do I put this simply? The movie itself, when I watched it, when it was just for the first time, because I have not watched it since then. It was a one and done for me, and I'll explain why. But basically, I watched it, and about halfway through, I kind of hit this point where I was like, "Is that it?" And what I mean by that is, so the first probably 30 minutes of the film is these two brothers, twin brothers, again played by Michael B. Jordan, and the story of them, from what I got from it, again, was that they are coming home from Chicago, that they were bootleggers of beer from Chicago, and that they were coming home away from Chicago doing some sort of business. And that's another thing that I didn't, I'm not, I'll get into in a minute. But they come again, coming home from Chicago, driving home into where they are, and into the location of this film where it's being set in, and it's in the Prohibition era. So beer is, is a, or alcohol is a different thing too, as far as like that from that time period as well. And then again, I feel like from a timing perspective, as far as like how the runtime went, that the first probably 30 to 45 minutes of this film was really, in my opinion at least, a major waste of time and a major waste of the movie, because they really just show like the movie itself. It just all it really shows you is these brothers coming back, and they're pretty much reconnecting with people that they left initially from their hometown. And at that point, it just they give a little bit of like a little bit like a teeny like 0.001% of a backstory about what they were doing in Chicago, why they come home, what they do, what happened there, why did they get in trouble, did they not? Like they kind of like story wise, it just kind of glazes over the reason why they're in Chicago, which all they ever even say, to my knowledge of it now, is that they were doing business there, and it was going good. They did some shady stuff, some shady business, and that's why they left. And they came and they left and wanted to go home. And the whole entire first 30 minutes of the movie is them pretty much meeting old friends and family, or old friends that they knew before they left, or just people from their past, and getting these people to really, because they basically, at the beginning of the movie, they go to this kind of like a gin joint place, which is at the time, at the beginning of the movie, it's an empty, pretty much like an just empty building that they are planning to reincarnate, or rebirth into a gin joint later on in the movie, which they end up doing, and it looks really beautiful from that perspective. But so that's in the beginning, and then they again go through their their back history a little bit, and they go on like all these like around town, and to kind of prepare to open this place up as a grand opening of them being back in town, and so on and so forth. And so you see them meeting all these people for about the first 30 40 minutes of the movie, and again they get asked over and over again by different people that they meet from their background, that about what happened in Chicago, why to go bad, like these people already knew about it, but they didn't really share any details about it. And to me, for how much time this movie spends on their history, and the people that they meet, and them gearing up for this party that they're gonna basically have, I don't know. I don't know for the life of me, and this is just again my feelings on it. I don't know why it was such an important part of the movie story wise, when it really ended up meaning absolutely nothing to me, at least. Unless I missed something in the movie story wise. I don't really know why they spent that much time of the movie, like a third of it, explaining what they were doing in Chicago, and why they came back and what went wrong. And I remember when I first saw the movie that I was wanting and waiting and just being trying to be patient for that story part of it, like that part of the story to become realized, essentially, to become apparent on what they were doing there and what happened. And it just never happened. Like it literally goes from that part of the movie literally right into into them like restoring this barn, essentially, into the party that they're gonna have for the night, essentially. And right then and there, I was kind of immediately let down by the not the whole movie, but I was pretty disappointed right then and there by that. I was like, this is kind of that was just kind of dumb in my opinion. I just don't understand why it was so evident in such a hefty part of the runtime that it just didn't make sense to me. And then they, of course, they get this barn going, and they get the musical talent hired, like, ready to go, and then they get it prepared, and that made it more interesting. That kind of got it going a little bit more again too. And then they kind of fast forward into the nighttime part of it, and this barn, I will say this, like the barn that they like transform, it looks beautiful. They did a great job as far as like production and set production of making it look really really cool from how it looked in the beginning of the movie. I like that part a lot, so that was kind of cool too. Um, but again, they recruit all this talent to come to this party. They invite pretty much everyone from their hometown to come to the party to just celebrate them being home and that whole experience. And then it's funny because at the train station that they're at, that's where Haley Steinfeld makes her entrance into the film in a way where she notices one. I forget if it's Smoke or Stack, either one, but notices him, comes over to him and questions him on why he left her, and then that also goes for the most part at that point unanswered and unwilling to answer from Michael B. Jordan's character standpoint, and that made me even again that left me with even more questions about why she was there, which it answers more later in the movie as far as like when they're actually at the party a little bit. There's like a 2 minute conversation that they have that goes a little bit in detail, but not too much. But that's really kind of my feeling of the overall movie overall is that there's a long, like massive storyline that makes no sense or it's unexplained or there's just no details. And this is kind of where I go back to having or feeling when I go back to feeling about the what I mentioned before, which is if you're gonna have a runtime of a horror movie of over 2 hours, your story has got to be strong. And I don't mean like as far as like blood and gore and all that stuff, which makes up a horror movie. It makes a horror movie. But like I feel like the story itself that was built into this film for the first hour and a half probably of it until things get going into the horror side of it, all that for me was totally irrelevant to the actual movie. I fully realized what I mean. I understand what the whole character backgrounds were as far as like why they were there and why they were part of the story, but I feel like the intentionality of how it was done, as as far as like scenes go, was totally worthless and irrelevant. And when we got about halfway through the film itself, when we were watching it for the first time, I remember just like asking my wife, I was like, people gave this extremely high reviews. And I just didn't understand it. I didn't get it. I was like, why? I was like, how is this movie rated so good and so high on reviews from the general audience? Where to me, like the first hour of it was kind of just it wasn't worthless. It just felt to be not a great strong story yet. And again, I didn't know where it was going yet, but it just didn't seem that good yet. So then from there we move on into the actual, party part of the movie essentially where they get this, this building again reimagined to get it going, get it opened up and get it ready for the party. And then that's where the movie gets a little bit more interesting, and as I will give it this much credit. I will say that for about 20-30 minutes it had me going. So from the point where people start to show up for this party and people from their history start to show up and they start having a good time. There's music going, and it's a beautiful scene as far as the actual scenery goes, and the production of the set. Like it looks very very good on film for that part, and the colors were really cool looking, and all that was really cool. And then it got weird again because that's when the horror side of it starts. Where I forget the actor's name in it, I forget his character's name, but the guy shows up and or I mean, they bring him in the story before a little bit as an outside character, nothing to do with Michael B. Jordan's character that too. But the guy comes in there, like he makes his intro with like breaking into that house, I think filled with Native Americans in it, and then he pretty much vampires them, I'm assuming is what it was, into becoming like into turning them. And then later on in the movie they all together come over to this house and at night at this point, and they ask for entrance into it basically. And that's when things really kind of get going, because then at that point Michael B. Jordan's Smoke and Stack characters, Haley Steinfeld, all of them are coming up to the actual entrance. And that's where there's kind of like what I would say like one of the most pivotal scenes in the film, where basically they're all together at the entrance, and the guy, again I forget his name, it's my bad, but him and the group are there again asking for permission to come in and entertain them essentially with their music because they have guitars and stuff like that and instruments. And then they get questioned by Michael B. Jordan's character, Smoke and Stack, and it's a very interesting, like, that scene was very interesting, and that's where I got back into it a little bit. And then they get denied, of course, or they get denied from entrance, and then they like, kind of wander off for a little bit. And then what was weird is that from that point on, I was like, okay, where is this movie going to go? Because at that point, it's about an hour 30, an hour 40 into, maybe a little bit less, but it's easily halfway through the film, and at that point, I was like, okay, well, this has got to be getting really, really to the point now because it's over halfway over at this point, so we've got to be close to to getting into the horror aspect of this film. And then it happens where basically Haley Steinfeld goes out there, and she speaks with them, and they go vampire on her basically and turn her essentially, and then it goes interestingly weird from that point on because of the fact that slowly all these characters that are inside of this barn end up going outside and getting turned over essentially, and then Haley comes back in, or she comes back in looking normal, I should say, and then she does her thing with Michael B. Jordan's character. They do their thing, which I won't say on camera here, but they do their thing, and then she bites him, eats him while they're doing their thing essentially, and then she runs out, and then she has a really funny moment which made me laugh in the movie because she has her moment where I think she says like on her like way running out of the barn or whatever it is, she's like, oh yeah, we're gonna get you all eventually, or we'll get you all eventually, and that kind of thing, and that made me laugh. Like whatever she said was funny, and at that point in the movie, I'm like, okay, again, where is this going? Like this is obviously not a good thing anymore. This is not a good. It's turning into the horror movie part, which is again had me interested again, which is it was losing me and gaining me back, losing me, gaining me back again. So it was interesting for that part. And then from there, it went on to being where this thing where it was like, okay, like again, where is this going to go as a movie? And then all of a sudden it gets to that weird point where they do like the outside dance, like the circular outside dance, which I think is like a legitimate. It's like an actual dance. I forget where like the history of it and all that kind of stuff. I watched a behind the scenes video on YouTube about like how they made it and why they made the dance. They do all that, and then it just gets weirder, and then it becomes a point in the movie where they realize that they're gonna have to like face these vampires, which they don't call them vampires at all, but they just they face them. They know they're gonna have to face them, and then it becomes to me one of the biggest kind of like I guess flops of an ending. Like I knew what was gonna happen at that point. I knew I could. It was just a really kind of like a very very extreme giveaway that at that point that you knew they were gonna fight each other or they were gonna try and get out and escape out of this barn and go through like this group of vampires basically. And so they basically do that. They let them in essentially, and then kind of they go at it for 5 minutes, whatever it is, and that's kind of where the movie goes. Just I don't say south because it was already south for me, but it goes weird at that point because, and that's kind of where I tuned off, and that's when I started kind of laughing at the rest of the film because and that's where I'll kind of like end my like description of it because again at that point I kind of gave up on being interested in it overall, and I kind of just knew what was going to happen at the end. Sort of we still finished the movie off as like just watching it just to finish it, but I just felt very I felt very let down by it overall because for me, when you see a movie get as much promotion as Sinners did, and as much high glory, high satisfaction from both Rotten Tomatoes and audience score, and then you watch it, and then like halfway through, you know exactly what's gonna happen. It just seems like a letdown, and I almost feel like I'm a little bit spoiled mentally for horror movies because there's another studio that makes movies for horror most commonly, which is A24, and they make a lot of horror movies that are much much more. I don't want to say thought out, but the storylines in the A24 films are a lot more deeper and more dense and more. They make you think, and they're really really twisted in a way, not like in a bloody way, but just they're more twisted for how they're going to end in the process of getting to the ending. And that's where Sinners really fell apart for me because Sinners to me was just a big flop of a story. And the sad thing about it was that the acting was so good in it, but the story was so bad in my opinion. I'm not blaming anyone as far as like writers or Ryan Coogler for like anything like bad for directing. 'Cause the directing was good. Like again, the acting The acting was great overall. It was phenomenal. Like every actor in it did a great job of doing their character, and that's what kept me watching it. But again, the storyline was terrible. I thought it was hard to get through the first half of it because I didn't know where it was going, and it just was boring. It was a boring lead up. It was a boring. Just I just didn't understand why they had so much of what they had in the film from the beginning, and even when Haley Steinfeld's character, before everything goes weird on it for the vampire side, even before that happens, and she's in there with Smoker set with Michael B. Jordan basically, and she's like asking why he left and what happened between them because like it comes up pretty quickly that they were together when they were in Chicago, and or I think it was Chicago, or they were together at some point in the past. And basically she's wondering what happened and why it went south and why it went bad, and he kind of just blows her off. And so like even that, like, which I thought was like kind of the only real kind of like solid story point to the whole movie and why she was even there in the first place. Like even that wasn't very strong for a story point, and so that also didn't make the movie any better because I thought she was so like Haley Steinfeld's character was so involved with the promotion of the film, like all the entire like just all the premieres that they have for the film, which usually involve the biggest cast members overall that are in the movie with either the most lines or the biggest story points. She was there for all the premieres with him. So I was guessing that she would have a really big impact in the movie, and she does in some way because she turns his character into a she turns him over, but and she's obviously a part of his past from the film too, or like story wise. But like I felt like even her part was not really that important. It was and it wasn't. You know what I mean? It was a weird thing. So again, this movie overall it's so hard to review for me a little bit because again the story was very very weak in my opinion. But the weird thing is that the horror part of it, like the blood and the action, that was all really really good. And that's what's weird about it, is that it was a very good bad good bad movie overall. And I mean I've only watched it once, which was that time because again at about halfway through the whole movie I was like I kind of gave up on it and was like okay that's it. And even my wife was telling me that she has spoken to some people before we watched it where she was like yeah she's like everyone has told me that it gets to a point where you know exactly what's going to happen, and once you get to that point you just are bored of it or it's just not as good anymore. And it's weird because that's exactly what happened to us when we watched it, where we were very curious with the build up and the build up and the build up, and then all of a sudden things happen, and like you just know the ending for the most part. I mean, there was a few twists and stuff like that, but not really a bunch of them to justify the runtime and to justify the weak story. So again, it was a great movie as far as acting. Again, I can't give enough credit to the actors and for doing their thing, like fully they were great. They did a great job of that. But even if you have great acting in there, if the story isn't good, then it doesn't really match up to the acting, no matter what you do. So that's kind of my overall feelings about the movie called Sinners that came out this year. Um, and again, my bad if this review was not as good as other ones I've done before or as descriptive as this. That this movie I wanted to review because it was a big movie for this year in 2025. It made a big splash in theaters. It made a big splash online. It made a big splash everywhere that it was mentioned, and it got really high praise. And some people loved it, and that's all good. I can't speak to anyone else's opinion as far as all that stuff goes. I just don't understand how it was received so well because to me it was just not up there. It was though, however, it was related to another horror film that came out years before it. I forget what the actual movie was. I can't think of it right now as far as that goes. But I remember there was a movie that a ton of people were referencing to it being like another version of the same thing as what the other movie was, online as well. So I thought that was interesting too. But what I'd love to know is from all of you in the comments below is let me know what you think about the movie Sinners, if you liked it, if you didn't like it at all, if you just think things that you would have changed about it, or whether for me it was a runtime and the first half being worthless almost in a way. But let me know what you think about the movie Sinners. Again, I'd love to hear your thoughts and feelings as well. If you like this video, then give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more content as well. Otherwise, thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys all in the next movie review.